In early August 2005, something extraordinary and unprecedented was being built beneath the ground in Fortaleza, a bustling city on Brazil's northeast coast. At street level, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Locals passed by every day on Avenida Dom Manuel, unaware that beneath their feet, a group of daring criminals were constructing a tunnel that would lead straight into one of the country's most secure vaults, the vault of the Banco Central do Brasil branch. What unfolded over the next 3 months became one of the most audacious bank heists in modern history, a crime that stunned the world and forced Brazil to confront the limits of security and human ingenuity. The plot was simple in concept but astonishing in execution. Instead of walking through the front door under threat of violence, these thieves would enter from below unnoticed, unarmed, and unchallenged. Their goal was to penetrate deep into the heart of the central bank branch and walk out with untraceable cash, a target that weighed millions in every sense of the word. In May 2005, a group of men rented a modest commercial property a short distance from the central bank building. On the surface, it was an ordinary business. They displayed signage advertising landscaping supplies, including artificial turf and plants. Neighbors noticed trucks coming and going with soil and gravel, but few suspected anything unusual. After all, a landscaping supply business would naturally move dirt around as part of its daily operations. But beneath this facade, the real project was anything but ordinary. Inside that rented property, the thieves began digging. Not a shallow ditch, not a basement excavation. They started a tunnel. Over the course of roughly 3 months, they carved out a passage nearly 80 meters long, about 260 feet, that snaked under city streets, sidewalks, and utilities directly toward the central bank's vault. The tunnel itself was a marvel of criminal engineering. It wasn't a rough hole scraped hastily into the earth. It was deliberately reinforced with wooden beams and plastic sheeting to prevent collapse. Electric lights were run along its length. Ventilation and even rudimentary air conditioning were installed so workers could breathe safely as they dug deeper underground, often 4 meters, more than 13 feet, below street level. At times, isotonic drinks and ointments for muscle strain were reportedly found in the tunnel, evidence of the brutal, sweaty labor required just to keep the operation going. Behind the scenes, this was no random crime of opportunity. The gang had studied the building meticulously. They knew exactly where the vault was located and what kind of currency it held. Importantly, they targeted banknotes that were no longer insured and were earmarked for destruction. These 50 real bills, although worth significant value, weren't individually tracked in a way that would make serial numbers easy to trace. In other words, the money was effectively untraceable. The work underground was slow, painstaking, and dangerous. The soil had to be removed discreetly. Each wagonful of dirt hauled away was loaded into vans and trucks under the guise of landscaping deliveries. No alarms were ever triggered. Neighbors assumed the activity was ordinary. Security cameras above ground remained unaware of the subterranean excavation slowly advancing toward one of the most secure vaults in the country. Then, in the early hours of the weekend of August 5th to 6th, 2005, the plan reached its culmination. Under cover of night and with no one watching above them, the thieves reached the reinforced concrete floor of the bank's currency vault. This wasn't a thin slab of cement. It was more than a meter thick, reinforced with steel. Using specialized tools, diamond-tipped drills, concrete saws designed to reduce noise, and power cutters, they broke through the barrier with a focus that belied the risk of detection. Once inside the vault, the scale of their haul became clear. Inside sat containers holding more than 160 million Brazilian reais, roughly equivalent to $70 million US dollars at the time. The bills were mostly 50 real notes, stacked tightly and weighing in total over 3.5 tons. To even lift that amount of currency required careful planning, strength, and time. Instead of rushing, the criminals worked methodically. Over the course of the night and into the early hours of the following morning, teams moved bags of cash back through the tunnel. Workers on both ends passed containers hand to hand, stacking them in waiting vehicles near their entrance point. It was a quiet, efficient operation, almost antiseptic in its precision. No shots were fired, no guards were harmed, no alarms went off. By Monday morning, when bank employees returned to work, they were greeted with disbelief. A hole in the vault floor, rubble scattered around, and a completely emptied cash reserve meant for decommissioning. It was clear something catastrophic had happened. But by then, the robbers were already gone. In the immediate aftermath, Authorities launched Operacao Totupera, Operation Mole, a nationwide investigation involving hundreds of federal police officers. Investigators quickly realized this wasn't the work of amateurs. The level of planning and execution suggested insider knowledge, perhaps access to blueprints or technical details that only someone familiar with the bank's layout could provide. Over the coming months, police arrested numerous suspects connected to the heist. Records differ, but more than 100 people were detained as part of the probe. Some were petty operatives who helped with logistics. Others were believed to be part of organized crime groups like the 1st Capital Command, Comando Vermelho, or other syndicates with deep roots in Brazil's criminal underworld. One of the alleged masterminds behind the job, Luis Fernando Ribeiro, known as Fernandinho, was said to be in his mid-20s at the time of the robbery. But his story ended in tragedy and violence that seemed almost as dramatic as the heist itself. Some months after the burglary, he was kidnapped, and despite his family reportedly paying a massive ransom, he was murdered and found abandoned on a road outside Rio de Janeiro. The circumstances of his death raised allegations that even law enforcement officials may have been involved in darker dealings as the case unfolded. The authorities did manage to recover part of the stolen loot over time. Estimates suggest roughly $20 to $30 million reais were found either hidden in safe houses seized from suspects or discovered through follow-up investigations. But the overwhelming majority, well over 80% of the cash, has never been recovered. Why so much remains missing is partly due to how the gang laundered the funds. Much of the money was quickly moved into cars, properties, offshore accounts, and other assets before police could track it. Some suspects were caught appearing with large amounts of cash or spending conspicuously, leading to arrests that eventually helped police wedge open lines of inquiry. But despite the scale of the operation, significant questions linger. How did the gang maintain such secrecy for so long? How did they avoid detection while moving tons of soil out of the rented property? And perhaps most perplexing, what role, if any, did insiders play within the bank itself? These questions continue to fuel speculation and controversy in Brazil and beyond. The Banco Central heist didn't just expose a vulnerability in one branch vault in Fortaleza. It exposed blind spots in how security, law enforcement, and corporate infrastructure can be manipulated. It became a defining case study in criminal ingenuity, showing that even the most secure financial institutions could be breached not by brute force but by patience, discipline, and meticulous planning. In the years since, the heist has entered popular culture, the subject of documentaries, films, and countless articles. Some portray it as a Robin Hood-style theft against a faceless institution. Others emphasize the ruthless and brutal underworld that orchestrated it. But regardless of interpretation, the facts remain. This was a crime of engineering precision, audacious planning, and massive financial impact.